Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of the iNewspaper and iNews.co.uk. We've got a little bit of a different episode today. It's still me, it's still Calvin, it's still George, but not necessarily all at the same time or in the right order, as someone once said. I've got Calvin here, live from Poland for the next 40 minutes or so, and then I'm going to have George a little bit later on. So we'll do our best to answer all your questions in two parts of today's podcast.
2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'd also like to apologise to YouTube viewers of this podcast for my appearance. I'm rehabbing an ankle injury at the moment and have just been for my first run, and it was both very hard and very painful. So I'm a little red and sweaty and all sorts of things. But, Calvin, how's Poland?
We only got here very late last night. We got here about 1 o'clock in the morning today, actually, and practiced twice today, and it's absolutely roasting.
So are you on clay there or are you on hard?
No, hard courts.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that people don't realise, that Eastern Europe at this time of year is stealth, absolutely roasting hot.
Yeah.
You don't associate it with it, but it's also landlocked, so there's no kind of breeze or anything. So, but yeah.
Very good. Ticking off another venue. Is this a new venue to you, this one?
It's a new venue, but I've been to Poland a good few times, as it happens. So, yeah.
Iga Swiatek and Hubert Hurkacz country, of course. Before anything else, and there is lots else, there's Tommy Paul, there's Elena Rybakina, there's rain in America, there's string tension chat. Yes, I know everyone gets excited about that kind of thing. We'll also talk Tsitsipas, Murray, and the Davis Cup team before we bring George in a little bit later. But first, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who've been leaving loads of amazing reviews. There are a lot more of you, as I've said before, than there have ever been, and it's great to have some of you saying how much you've enjoyed it. Thanks to Dino888888, I think I've got the right number of eights, who says, amazing show. I can't watch tennis unless it's Grand Slam season, and this show really informed me about everything going on in the tennis world. I just started watching 2 months ago and haven't missed an episode since. Jeremy Soundtrap says, sanity. It's great to hear people having discussions and expressing opinions that are actually grounded in reality. Quite a rare treat these days. Keep up the good work. PJ says, if I could give it 6 stars, I wouldn't. 5 is about right. I love tuning in each week to get insights and updates of the tour. Most of the hosts are very clever. One of my favourite podcasts, that's Phil from Boston. Most of the hosts are very clever. Now, given that there are only 3 hosts, that is a very specific piece of shade, and I'm not going to speculate as to who's being shaded there, Phil, but noted. And finally, JDX says, great show that includes insider perspective and technical analysis, a lot of good/great tennis podcasts focused on the larger narratives around tour and tournaments. That's great. But Tennis Unfiltered provides an insider's perspective of the game, along with much needed technical and strategic analysis of players and why or how they win or lose. Thank you to all of you. As always, if you leave a 5-star review, I will massage our egos and read them out. Don't worry, we get our own dose of ego reining in, because we also get the odd 1-star review, and we probably read them and talk about them more than we do all of the others combined. But I won't give them the airtime on the podcast. I won't give them the satisfaction. As always, we love involving you in the podcast as much as we can, whether that's because you want to watch on YouTube or listen on wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to ask questions, you can do that as well. You can tweet us at unfilteredtennis, or you can email us tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. We've got a couple of questions that are going to sort of form the jumping off point of our podcast this evening. Calvin, we're going to start, I think, in America. Well, obviously we're going to start in America, but specifically with Tommy Paul. Buy and Sold on Twitter says ATP ranks Tommy Paul's serve at 37, and he's ranked 13. Since the serve is the most important shot and should be given extra weighting, does that mean he is ranked 5 for the rest of his game? And what does he need to do to improve his serve?
I don't think tennis is that binary that you can just say that's how it works. That reminded me of a parent of a girl I used to coach. Who was the parent was absolutely nuts, but he used to work on the basis that he'd say this girl had beaten a player 4-4 the week before, and then the week after that player had beaten a different girl 2-2, he'd go, well, by that thinking, she should obviously beat her love and love. It's like that's not that tennis doesn't work in such a binary nature because like you can say that Tommy Paul has his serve is, I don't even know how the ATP works out the rankings of serve or what have you, but he might have such and such a serve, but somebody else might also be top on those ground strokes. Like I imagine Djokovic is high in everything, serve and ground strokes and return. So it doesn't strictly work that way. Where you go, well, if serve's only that good, the rest of him's that good, he must be top 5 in the world and everything else. I don't think he's top 5. He's a very good player. I don't think he's top 5 in everything minus serve. I think I could probably name you 12 or 13 players who I think have got better ground strokes than him. But, tennis isn't like that. Tennis isn't the sum of its parts. It's intangibles and that kind of thing. And Tommy Paul presently happens to be very good at the intangibles, doesn't he?
Yeah, and he's someone, I remember when he came to Britain last year and he played Queens, and he's a very rare American in that his hero is Tim Henman. And he was going all kind of gushy about Tim Henman because he'd walked past him in the corridor at Queens. And he said, "Oh, Tim, I'm really sorry about the volleys I hit today. They were awful." And I think actually his coach at the time was telling him that he didn't like the grass at the moment, but he would learn to love it and it might end up being his best surface. Well, he's picked up the biggest result of his career, arguably, on hard courts. He beat Carlos Alcaraz in Toronto. He won 6-3, 4-6, 6-3. Carlos Alcaraz said he needs to improve a lot of things after that defeat. He's the first American man, Tommy Paul, in 6 years to beat a number one, which is quite a remarkable statistic. Unfortunately, he couldn't follow it up by beating Alcaraz's nemesis, Jannik Sinner, 6-4, 6-4. Given that Sinner beat Tommy Paul 6-4 and Paul beat Alcaraz in 3 sets, Calvin, by what's the maths for what Sinner's going to beat Alcaraz next time? Love, isn't it?
That would be 6-2, 6-1.
I see. Okay,
but without a doubt, yeah.
Get your money on that immediately.
If he doesn't, then Alcaraz deserves to be slated because of that. Because that's how it should be.
Just talking more broadly about Tommy Paul, I mean, semi-final of the National Bank Open, as it's now called in Toronto, it's a decent result. He is obviously part of this generation of American men, but kind of as I've alluded to, he's quite unusual, isn't he? He's not like the other players in the way that he plays, and I wonder whether that might hold him in quite good stead compared to, well, I mean, obviously we've had the serve bot generation in American tennis, where it's serve or bust, but I wonder whether because he doesn't have that big serve, it's kind of made him have to work harder on the rest of his game.
I don't know if he's not similar. I think he actually plays quite an American way traditionally that you'd expect. He's a baseline counter attacker, I think, and that tends to be historically how Americans play. You get a lot of you go down the rankings, sort of outside the top 100. There's a lot of Americans who play kind of like Tommy Paul does. So I wouldn't say he doesn't play in an American way. And there have been Americans who aren't serve bots. Francis Tiafoe's not serve bot. Guys like that. So, I think
they do exist.
Yeah, I think if I was to watch Tommy Paul and you to say without me knowing what nationality is he, I would probably say he's American.
But that's just the backwards cap, isn't it? Although actually that's increasingly common on the tour.
A lot of them do that now, don't they?
It's ridiculous. It really annoys me, like irrationally so. But anyway, let's move on to something more interesting, like string tension. Chris Thornton says, "I'm having my racket restrung. What tension do you, Calvin, recommend? Benefits for higher and lower tension. Keep up the great work with the pod." Calvin, we've talked a lot about string tensions of players. I get cautioned by the tennis press pack for daring to mention it in press conferences because it's so boring that no one will ever read about it. When it comes to amateurs, is there a broad range like there is with players, or is it like, no, you should all be stringing at this kind of tension?
I mean, it depends on the type of player that you are, and it entirely depends on what you find comfortable. Like I know players, I know big servers who have it at a certain tension, a low tension, because they think that helps them, and I know big servers who have it at tight tension because they think that helps them. It's entirely based on what you feel, how you feel it, what you feel's good in your racket, what you feel good comes off the ball. Historically, it is that the tighter you have your strings, the less power you'll get and the more control you'll get. And if you want more power and a bit, and you have to sacrifice some control, you'd have your strings strung looser than that. There has been some question raised about this in recent years, but I still stand by that basis because I think the physics would evidence that, in that it's almost like a catapult effect, that the looser you have your strings, the racket string bed would bend back and then send the strings forward more. So I would go on the basis that the looser you have your strings, the more power you're going to have to get, the more power you're going to get out of it, and the less control. Whereas the tighter you have them, the less power you're going to get, but you'll get a little bit more control. Now, things have changed a little bit with the coming of polyester strings, which most players use now. I mean, a lot of players use natural gut with polyester, and some of them use. Now, the thing with natural gut is that it's an extremely expensive string. I think it's about 60 quid a set, and it doesn't last very long. Right. So only the very, very best players, the players who are making a lot of money, tend to be able to afford it. You can get a synthetic gut, which somewhat is similar to it, but I would say it's only 50% similar at absolute best. But a few years ago, about 15, 20 years ago, polyester string came in, which is basically like a soft plastic when you feel it. And the thing with when that came in is that is stiff, so it doesn't. When you have generally natural gut for sure, and synthetic gut used to lose tension as it went on. The longer you'd have it in your racket, it would lose tension because it would stretch. Whereas polyester doesn't really stretch, so it holds tension quite a bit, although it can deaden out somewhat. But what I would say now, and what all stringing experts say, is that you should have, if you're stringing with a full bed of polyester, you should have it as loose as you feel comfortable with. Try and get it as low as you can feel comfortable with it at.
So, for example, if you're Chris, and I'm guessing Chris might be quite a decent player and he might have 3 rackets in his bag, is it worth getting them all strung at slightly different tensions to kind of try and find your Goldilocks almost, and try and find how loose you can go without feeling completely discombobulated?
You could do that in the short term. I wouldn't, if you, it's a weird one, because the reason why players would generally have a lot of rackets, why I used to have when I was playing, as I was in very much the synthetic gut age, was I'd probably have 3 or 4 rackets at all times, because you break strings a lot. It wasn't unfeasible that you'd break 3 strings in a match, so you had to have that many rackets. But now with polyester, you tend not to break them very often. So, like a lot of the players, for practice, they'll only take a couple of rackets out there with them. Because it's unlikely that they're going to break a lot, and then they might have, some of the very top players might have a couple of rackets strung a bit looser, a couple a bit tighter, in case the conditions change. And a lot of people change their tension due to with the conditions, whether it's altitude, whether it's a bit warmer, a bit colder. I mean, the polyester string has given some control to it. It used to be mad, you used to get players who, I remember Agassi used to, when he got on the match court, he'd put some of his rackets in the fridge. If it was particularly hot, because of course, if you're playing in hot temperature, then and you're playing with natural gut in there, it's going to loosen it out, because that's what it will do. So you used to put them in the fridge where the drinks are stored. I know players who won't travel. They won't travel with their rackets strung. They'll have them because they're in the hold in the plane. They think the change in the temperature in the hold will stiffen them up. So they will either they will take the rackets unstrung, or they'll cut them out as soon as they get anywhere and have all their rackets restrung. I know other players who don't care about that. I know other players who, I know Luke and Henry, who I coach, they'll just travel the world with their rackets, and they'll have them restrung when they break them. And if they don't break them after about, what I would say, a rule is, if your strings haven't broke after 10 or 12 hours of tennis, you should probably have them restrung. Right. And I'm talking about actual hours of playing there, not of if you do a 2-hour session and you sit talking to your mates for half an hour. I'm talking about actual 2 hours. I'm talking about 10 hours of actual playing.
Right, interesting. Yes, it's not the first time we've talked about string tension, and people either don't care at all, or people are really, really interested. So if you wanted to have skipped forward, this is the time to tune your ears back in if you've been ignoring us, because we're on to real stuff now, some people might say. We've had lots of questions about the Elena Rybakina situation in Montreal this week. Mr. Gibbs says, should the semi-final and final of 1,000 be allowed to be played on the same day? J-Rod says, what can tournaments do not to have these late nights? Ian Warren says, does Rybakina have a point rescheduling last week? It rained. Just to fill people in here, Elena Rybakina ended up in quite a tricky situation after her quarterfinal match of the National Bank Open ended at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, and then her semi-final was postponed to Sunday because of rain. She ended up playing, well, she would have ended up playing both the semi-final and the final on Sunday. As it was, she lost the semi-final to Ludmila Samsonova, who then lost Love and One in the final, probably as a consequence of her own schedule being pushed back. She actually played, in the end, 4 matches in the space of 3 days, 2 of which went 3 sets, including a very long one in the quarters. Calvin, scheduling is always a controversial issue. It's always a difficult one as well. It is hard to see what organisers could have done more, except for the fact that on Friday, the main court hosted the final last 16 match, which included Ludmila Samsonova, and then all 4 quarterfinal matches, which is why it ended up going to 3 a.m. Surely at that point, organisers need to look at taking the quarterfinals and splitting them across the 2 big courts.
First of all, I know Mr. Gibb, who wrote this. His daughter used to play on my, or still does play on my Yorkshire County Cup team, and she's a very good player, and she's a lovely girl, and he's a great bloke as well. So, yeah.
Well, you can answer his question first then. Should the semi-final and final of 1,000 be allowed to be played on the same day?
I mean, they didn't have much option. There's no option, really. The rain caused it. So there's nothing else you can do. You couldn't go into today because another tournament starts today. And things such as rankings are affected and that kind of thing. Like the rankings have to come out on a Monday. So if there's any way possible of getting it played, you have to do it. And then that's what happened. And it's just one of those things. Like, we can argue about the scheduling earlier in the week, but I think once it got to Saturday and Sunday, there wasn't a great deal that they could do about it, I don't think. But yeah, so ideally, no, you wouldn't ever play it. But I think in this situation, they had to, really.
These late nights, though, I mean, we're actually lucky, I think, at Wimbledon to have the curfew, which means that you can't play beyond 11 p.m., which, like I said, I think that is fortunate. I was there in Australia this year when Andy Murray was sitting on court going, it's ridiculous, they're not letting me go to the toilet, it's 3 a.m. I left the site at 5:45. The few fans who did stay to the bitter end left at 4:15 in the morning. And while I acknowledge that they had one of the nights of their lives, I don't think many people, well, I know not many people did. The Ball kids, for example, they were all up well past bedtime. And it's becoming an increasing trend as tennis gets slower, and no one can deny that tennis has got slower and matches have got longer. I think organisers need to look at it and go, hang on, matches are not the length they used to be. We can't have the same estimates that we used to have for how long matches will go on. And we can't schedule 5 singles matches on a court that starts at midday.
No, I mean, the thing with the late matches, there's a fine line between... I've seen some brilliant matches. Some of the most memorable matches I've seen have been night sessions at US Open. But there's a very fine line to going... This is going late night. The atmosphere is unbelievable. It's midnight in New York and the stadium's packed and the crowd are going nuts and that kind of thing. There's a fine line to that between, like, you know, kind of midnight, I think, is the line. And then it gets to like 1 o'clock in the morning and you're like, what are we doing playing at 1 o'clock in the morning here? So I don't want them to be saying, like, we're not going anything past 9 p.m. because I think then you lose so much. But the problem is that tennis is such a difficult sport to schedule. Like, if you're going to have night sessions, and I love the night sessions at US Open, you can't just have one match because you don't know how long it's going to last. And as we spoke about at the French Open, you especially can't have one women's match because it's best of 3 and they can be over in they could be over in 50
An hour,
minutes.
yeah. Well, and that's true. That's true of the Masters events, right? Because they're all best of 3, so you can't just put one men's match on.
Yeah. So you're basically then stuck that you've got to have 2 matches. But the problem with tennis is that if you get 2 long matches, you could look at 6 hours. So you could have 2 matches that last 2 hours. You could have 2 matches that last 6 hours. There's not really any other sport that you can say that about. So it's just so difficult to schedule. And the night matches, for a lot of places, is where they make the money. It's where the adverts, where the TV want the adverts, the TVs want them on at that time because that's
the corporate tickets
where they generate.
as well.
Corporate tickets, they can come in. That if it's not a huge event like Wimbledon, then there's a lot of a market for, and especially this is, you got to remember as well. This is not just the main ones we see on the telly. A lot of the events in Europe, in France especially, they start their matches at night because to get the crowds in. Luke, who I coach, played a tournament there, I think 3-4 weeks ago, and they were starting match. The first match of the day was 6 p.m.
Is there an argument that, and you tell me from a player's perspective how this would go down, if we said, right, the night session, and I should be clear, Montreal wasn't a night session, it was just one long session that went very late. But if you say, okay, there's 2 matches in the night session, it starts at, 7:30, fine, people get in. And if you're playing the second match and you don't start by 9:45, you're done. So you just get pushed to the next day. Or would players actually prefer to get on court at 10:30, play for 2 hours, and then not have to play 2 matches the next day?
It's not that straightforward answer. They want to know around about when they're on. So if it's one match before them, they all know. It's difficult because in any event, but the big events, they just switch court. It happens all the time. They just switch their court. Like the lads, Henry and Luke played a match last week, and it was going late. They just switched their court. And that's what they do all the time. But you can't just if you've scheduled a night match, it's the last match of a night match is usually the biggest match of the day in a lot of these places. So you can't just switch. You go, right, we're going to send you out to court 13. Like that. That's just not how it works. So I think players, the majority of players would err on they'd rather go on late than say they're coming back the next day. What they hate is uncertainty. That's the thing what players don't like. And I don't know whether there was a bit of this with Rybakina. I couldn't understand whether that's what she was trying to say, but I think it was saying, if players would prefer it if within reason, if they went, right, it's going to rain all day today, it's going to rain for the rest of the day, so we're just going to call it off for the day. Instead of, which a lot of refs absolutely love doing, and Wimbledon are an absolute nightmare for this, it can be absolutely chucking it down, and the schedule is 100% rain for the rest of the day, and it'd be like 2:00, and they'll go, no play before 2:30. Yeah. And then it gets to 2:30, and it's still tipping it down. They'll go, no play before 3 p.m. And you know that it's just impossible to work on that basis. That they'd rather them just go, like, it's raining all day. The forecast, it's crap. Let's call it off for the day and come back tomorrow.
Yeah. And it comes down to, I think, quite a good phrase from Rybakina. She said, leadership a little bit weak for now, but hopefully something is going to change because this year is many situations which I can't really understand. It's the first time, hopefully the last time we went so late, because I think it's a little bit unprofessional. I cannot really say the tournament because I think that the most important is the WTA here. So it's a pretty straightforward shot at the WTA. Which, look, we're all here to take shots at WTA leadership. That it's low-hanging fruit, I would suggest. But the WTA is an association of players, and it's also an association of tournaments. But it is first and foremost there to represent the players. And it sounds like increasingly the women's locker room is going, "Hang on, you are not doing a good job of representing our best interests here." And who knows? Maybe they'll all start flocking to the PTPA. Whether the PTPA will represent their best interests, people have their own opinions, and I happen to think they won't. But
it's not just the WTA as well, though. It's that they're a problem. The WTA are a problem. Referees can often be a problem. There are some really excellent referees around. There are some really poor ones who think that the tournament is there to facilitate them. And that's not the case. The referees are there to facilitate the tournaments. The referees are there to facilitate the players. It's not the other way around, but there are some huge egos in referees around tennis, and they will do what they want, even if the players, I've seen players phone up and ask, I'm flying, I'm doing a 10-hour flight from America over to Europe. on a Sunday night. Is there any chance I can get a Tuesday or Wednesday start? And the referees go, I'll see what I can do. And then next thing you know, they've got on the schedule for Monday, 12 p.m. And it's things like that. And I've seen those specific situations happen. And it's just, and there's no, and I've seen it when there's no reason why there can't have been a way around, but the referees will do what suits them and no one else. And they'll be quite open about it. I'm doing what suits me.
Very frustrating. Does Rybakina have a point rescheduling last week? I think our verdict is maybe not, and that it probably wasn't. I mean, like I said, I think they should have split the singles quarterfinals, because the thing is that what they had on, I went back and checked the order of play for Friday, and they had all the singles on the main court, and then the second biggest court Rogers, I think it's called, had, I think, doubles matches almost exclusively. Now, I'm not here to relegate doubles, but doubles matches are far less likely to go long, right, Calvin? Like, they're a much more predictable length.
It's unlikely that they ever go past an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they shouldn't. The whole point when they changed the double scoring system to sudden death due to the champions tiebreaks, they said they wanted to make every doubles match last an hour. I mean, it doesn't quite get that, but you're probably into an hour and a half most of the time, I'd say.
So it would have been dead easy, in my head anyway, to split the quarterfinals.
The problem is I agree with you there, James. That's ideally what you would do. Or the sensible thing to do it would be to say they're going to play 3 of the quarterfinals on the show court and 1 on the other. But then whoever it is, then you get people kicking off about bias and that kind of thing. And it's, why are these 2? So then you either have to have 2 on one, 2 on another, or all 4 on 1. And that really shouldn't be how it works. You should think like, maybe we'll go 2 and 3 and a 1, and then swap some doubles matches around or something.
Right, Calvin, because I know you don't want to miss the United match tonight, we're going to squeeze 2 topics into these last 10 minutes. I think we'll start with Stefanos Tsitsipas, because I know you've got strong views on this. He has, against all odds, sacked his dad. Apostolos Tsitsipas is out, and Mark Philippoussis, the man called Pooh, is in. He's obviously done some work with Stefanos Tsitsipas already. Is this a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, Calvin?
Yeah, I don't really see how it makes any difference at all, to be honest. He's had him in the camp before, and it wasn't particularly good. And as I said, I don't wish to speak out of turn here, but I truly believe that if Mark Philippoussis didn't have a Greek name and some Greek heritage, he would not have that job. That's the only reason he has that job. I've seen Mark Philippoussis do some coaching. I've been around him at a few tournaments over the summer. I wasn't one bit impressed, if I'm honest. He was coaching Sakkari for most of the summer. If people don't know that, and it's hardly like she was pulling trees up, is it? The most bizarre thing I saw from Mark Philippoussis, right? I don't know how many people saw Mark Philippoussis. How many people saw Mark Philippoussis play back in his playing days? He was a Wimbledon finalist. He was a very good player. Bizarrely, tactically was idiotic. He was a huge hitter of the ball. He had a huge serve. They used to call him Scud. Scud was his nickname when he was playing. So that gives you some idea about what type of player he was. He hardly ever hit any balls, which I found strange. And when Sakkari was practicing returns, and Philippoussis was stood on the service line, sort of rolling 20% serves down at her. And I thought, well, how bizarre that you got one of the best servers of all time. I mean, I do that because my serve's crap, and I'm 45 years old. And and the lads I play against, they'll absolutely destroy my serve. So I'll do that if they need to hit some returns. Yeah, not Mark Philippoussis. Like, what are you doing? I don't know. It just reeked of a little bit of laziness for me. Doing that kind of thing, but. Yeah, I mean, how rigorous was his? This is what I don't get with some of these players. How rigorous are they with right? We're going to go and get the best coach out there, because I know some of them are, and Mark Philippoussis isn't on that list. So yeah, I don't know if it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, James. I just don't think it's any step forward or back. It's the same.
Well, so there's 2 things I say just on that point. I mean, we spoke about this the other week, but Max Eisenbud saying that he pretty much would give players a list of 2 or 3 coaches. So, is that the most exhaustive hunt in the world? Maybe not. I actually happen to think that, we'll say we like about Emma Raducanu's approach to coaches, if you're talking about an exhaustive search, you can't say they haven't been at least reasonably thorough in
They've gone
terms
the
of
other
going
way.
out. Yeah,
They've gone the other way though. They've not. They've just tried to prove that every coach was no good.
yeah.
And that's been well, they've openly said it, that she doesn't think, her and her dad don't think any coaches are any good. So she asks questions because she knows the answers to see if they get them right. I mean, come on.
But the other thing I would say is that, Stefanos Tsitsipas had his dad and to a lesser extent his mum in his ear his whole life. And I don't think he's a super mature personality, particularly. I think he's a little bit of a man-child. And so, cutting the umbilical cord was always going to be really hard for him. And I think probably Philippoussis, he speaks Greek, albeit I'm told with a weird accent. He's worked with him before, obviously. It's kind of like a sort of an easy transition. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a year or 9 months with Philippoussis and then went and got someone who is, completely outside the kind of inner circle. Because clearly Philippoussis is an easy hire, if you like. So I wonder if there's an element of that, and that might end up being.
I mean, maybe I've got to admit, I wouldn't hold this again. If Tsitsipas doesn't have great results, I wouldn't necessarily put that on Philippoussis. That he doesn't look like an extremely focused player to me at the minute. And like some of the lines, some of the stuff he was coming out with last week, he said something last week that he'd rather be ranked number 1 in the world than win a slam because that proves that he's a better tennis player or something. That's just absolute nonsense. Said something about that would secure his legacy. Now there's only been one male player that was world number 1 and didn't win a slam, and that's Marcelo Rios. And what does anybody know of Marcelo Rios' legacy? So, and I know why he's saying that is because he's figured out it's unlikely I'm winning a slam at the minute. But there could be, because I play nearly every week, there could be some weird freak ranking situation where I can get to world number 1 for a week or something. Well, there nearly wasn't there? Was it earlier this year?
He wasn't far away. US Open, I think he actually he didn't have to do that well. And actually, even at the Australian Open, he only needed 1 or 2 other results to go his way. It wouldn't have been hard.
Yeah, I think he's looking at that. And that to me doesn't show a huge amount of drive. The correct answer to that is I want to do both.
Yeah. He lost first round last week to Gael Monfils in straight sets, 4-3, after winning the title in Los Cabos. And you were mentioning not very focused, and I think that might be something.
I mean, yeah, you only have to look at his social media to see where his focus is at the minute.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that relationship. I don't need any more. And I won't even speak its name. Right, very finally, Davis Cup teams have been named today for the Davis Cup finals group stages, which are in September. Britain are one of the hosts in Manchester. Great to have some top-level tennis going back to Manchester, a place with a history of Davis Cup results. Didsbury Club, of course, hosting one of the most famous British collapses of all time. It still has legendary status in the British press packers. It's known as doing a Didsbury. When you say, we could be out of here quite early tonight, is known as the Didsbury rule, is you must never tempt fate because there was a famous collapse at Didsbury, which one day we might talk about a bit more. But Andy Murray is back in the Davis Cup team. He's only played 1 singles match for Great Britain in the last 4 years. That was against Kazakhstan last year. He joins Dan Evans, Cam Norrie and Neil Skupski in the team. I suppose not a great surprise because Jack Draper is still on the sort of way back from injury, although he's been training at a pretty high level for quite some time. But, I mean, this is starting to feel like Andy Murray's last hurrah. Couple of Davis Cup ties on home soil. His record in Davis Cup in singles is 32-3. I mean, it's stellar.
He's had a few last hurrahs, hasn't he? Like keep saying this is his last hurrah. I've got to be honest, he didn't play bad at Wimbledon. He played bad the second day when he came on. But if you just take the grass and up to now, I think he's playing some bloody good tennis, I thought he was excellent against Taylor Fritz, and I thought he was really not unlucky. He wasn't unlucky to win it. He was just unfortunate that things didn't go his way when they could have. But I thought that was one of the best matches he's played and lost. I thought he played really well against Max Purcell last week. I'm disappointed I think he might have given Sinner a real tough day, Yeah. Sinner's pretty one-dimensional. And I think Murray would have had a little look and thought, I know what I'm going for here. But it's going to be an interesting one for Lee on that, because I think probably got to play Murray, I think.
I mean,
and the other two, like, can you play Norris? Like, can you play Nos, do you think? Like,
I mean,
he's British number one.
Surely, I don't know. Maybe you get really matchup specific. Like maybe you sort of go and pick your way through it.
He's not playing well at the minute.
But then equally, it wouldn't be beyond Dan Evans. So.
No, but I mean, Evans won a title. Like, he's not, other than that, he's not been in great form, but he's won some tennis matches. He's shown that under pressure, he's going to win some matches. I'd go with Evans and I'd go with Evans and Murray, to be honest.
I guess a lot's going to, we've still got another Masters event and the US Open to go. You'd think a lot of it is going to rest on how. I would think they might try and give Murray a soft singles match. I can't think who the Swiss number 2 is at the moment, but it's Marc-Andrea Hursler. I mean, who's actually not a bad player at all.
Is it only one match? Or is it groups again?
So it's groups, yeah. So they're in with Australia, Switzerland, and France.
I mean, you've got to play Murray. I think on strength of it, Murray's the best player at the minute. I think I'd have him above Evo and Norrie. And I can't find an argument that Norrie's currently in the top 2.
Yeah. Right, very finally, Calvin, just on Davis Cup. The new USA captain, people remember the stink that was created by their previous team falling apart. Bob Bryan is captain now, and he's picked Francis Tiafoe, Tommy Paul, Mackenzie McDonald, Austin Krajicek, and Rajiv Ram. I mean, that team, he's picked a specialist doubles team, which I guess if you're going to make Bob Bryan Davis Cup captain, he's unlikely not to pick a specialist doubles pair. Rajiv Ram, Austin Krajicek's a tough pair to beat now, isn't it?
It would have been a year ago.
You think?
To wonder whether... I don't know. I saw Rajiv and Joe had a good week last week. They made the final. But Rajiv's had some problems with his Achilles this year. I don't know where he serves at. I saw him pre-grass, and Rajiv wasn't serving great. It was a bit of a struggle. I don't know if he's managed to get over that, and if he has, then it's a good pairing. That
I suppose they might also take a view, on the day. Austin Krajicek, obviously, you're not too worried about his fitness, but if Rajiv wakes up and his Achilles is in bits, Tommy Paul's played some quite high level doubles. I can imagine him slotting in quite well. I don't know if he plays the same side.
It's not just about whether they're good doubles players, though. It's pairings as well.
Yeah.
In theory, that it's matchups. In theory, Austin and Rajiv could gel together similarly to Joe and Rajiv. I think. Whereas if you put Tommy Paul in with one of them, he's not going to be serving volley, and he's going to be playing quite a different style to both Rajiv and to Dodig, who Krajicek normally plays with.
Right.
Like Rajiv and Dodig, you could interchange them with how they play pretty much. They're both going to serve volley. That kind of thing. So, whereas Tommy Paul's not going to do that. So you then thinking, well, are we compromising what Austin brings here by putting him in with Tommy Paul? Now we better off just putting Tommy Paul and Francis Tiafoe or something like that. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, it'd be interesting. That will be interesting actually, because Bob Bryan's on the staff then, and really interesting mix-up that they've gone for a doubles player as captain.
Yeah, I mean, given what happened, I think that it sort of seems inevitable. I mean, Bob Bryan's also... I mean, I've only met him once or twice, but he seems like a really nice guy and quite affable. And obviously, everyone respects what he's done in the game. There's no... Marty Fish was a different type of guy, and people had different views on his own. So, Right, Calvin, you've got some lovely lift music playing in the background, and you've also got Manchester United kicking off 2 minutes ago, so I'm going to let you go. But thank you, as always, for joining us. Best of luck in Poland this week, and we'll catch up with you wherever you are in the world next week.
See you later.
Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. By the magic of television, although in this case not actually television, by the magic of the internet, I have swapped George Bellshaw in for Calvin Betton, who is off to watch his beloved Man United. How he's watching it from Poland, I didn't interrogate, but I'm reliably informed it's completely legal. George has joined us, fresh from dinner. Where'd you go for dinner, George? I hear you've been out with your parents.
I didn't actually end up going out because we ended up being a bit later. So we just had an Indian takeaway from a
Lovely.
local Sutton Coldfield establishment called
I would assume
Kababish.
that the curry house in Sutton Coldfield is tip top.
They are very good. I would say my favourite one's one called the Jarhead, just in case we have any kind of local listeners who are wanting to try the cuisine. But Kababish is a nice, good, cheap and cheerful takeaway. Know what you're getting, can't go wrong.
Have you seen that TikTok series where these two lads like go and try and find the hottest curry in Britain? It's just like they just go to different restaurants and order the hottest thing on the menu.
That actually makes me hark back to one of my finest moments in journalism, James, because I don't actually know if you knew me at this stage of my career, but I used to do lots of kind of fun things, like non-tennis things. I took on like the world's strongest man, a series of physical challenges, and I was battered by a sumo wrestler and things like that. And one of the things they got me to do was a Facebook Live, which I don't know if you remember those things.
I'm aware, yeah.
Very big in the journalism game for about 6 months when everyone thought it was going to be the answer to eternal website traffic.
Yeah.
And I sat on a Facebook Live for 45 minutes eating what claimed to be the UK's hottest supermarket curry. There was no one else on, and I couldn't believe it. Like, honestly, about 35,000 people watched me do this.
Wow.
And were like just asking lots of questions and accusing me of like not eating the chilies hard enough and putting me through eternal pain. Basically.
Not eating the chilies hard enough. Oh my God. All right, okay. Well, did you reckon that video still exists, George?
Probably in the deep, dark archives of Metro's video. We could maybe post... there's a good video of me taking on the world's strongest man that's quite good fun for 3 minutes. We can maybe post as a reply to this week's post for a bit of fun.
I'll put that in the show notes. Yes. Now, I didn't... Some of you who did ask a question on Twitter or an email, remember, if you want to ask a question, it's @unfiltertennis on Twitter, or it's tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. I didn't ask them all to Calvin because I thought, well, let's make sure George has something to chew on.
It's nice for me to get a question occasionally. They're normally to Calvin, aren't they?
I mean, they weren't really addressed to you, but I've made them to
I
you,
know
George.
they're not, but it's nice for you to put them aside for me, because otherwise it's a Calvin podcast. Which maybe it should be, to be honest.
Don't put that idea in his head, George. If you're listening, Calvin, we're very keen on the three-way. It's fine. Not that sort of three-way. Oh, I'm talking myself into a hole now. Right, Michael Middleton asks, with Alcaraz, Rune and Sinner now in the top 6, are we seeing a potential new big 3 take shape, or do you guys think that's just a bit of an easy media hype story for the kind of tennis fans who miss Roger and Rafa, and is this title a watershed for Sinner? First of all, if it's easy and media hyped in a story, I'm right here for it, so I'm afraid you're not going to find much pushback from me on that one. The title he's referring to is, of course, Jannik Sinner winning the title in Toronto, which we sort of alluded to in the first half, but didn't actually get onto. He beat Matteo Berrettini, Gael Monfils, Tommy Paul, and Alex De Minaur in the final. Dropped just one set along the way to a resurgent Gael Monfils. Is this title a watershed for Jannik Sinner? I think it's entirely possible that it is, George. As we mentioned, he's already been to 2 Masters 1000 titles before, lost them both. I think it's significant they're both on North American hard courts, but there is something about that first title, isn't there? That first big title, you maybe just imbue him with a little bit more self-belief.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think it was a bad set of players to beat, really. Berrettini did pretty well at Wimbledon. Gave Alcaraz a good match. Tommy Paul had been in really good form, beat Alcaraz at this tournament. Not that Alcaraz is always the yardstick, but he does kind of help. Monfils is quite weird. Of all the names we've named, Monfils is probably the last one you'd really have expected to take a set off Sinner at this stage in his career, but he had some decent results this week. Sort of out the blue as well, which was nice. I think it's difficult, isn't it? I think Sinner is the one player who feels like he can go toe-to-toe with Alcaraz, which is a huge positive for anyone, because if he hadn't had a couple of really good matches, a handful of matches with him, you'd be looking at this generation like, oh dear, it's going to be just all Alcaraz. And Alcaraz is brilliant, but tennis will lift itself to the highs it can be, and we know it can be through Roger, Rafa and Novak, when you have players of similar ilk and big matches on big stages, which Djokovic will buy us some time here because he and Alcaraz will play for a couple of years, but people need to catch up to Alcaraz and push him. I think Sinner's bigger problem is he's not that good on the rest of the tour, I would say. Like he's not really convinced against Novak. He's not overly convinced against Medvedev even, I wouldn't say. I don't see him going into every match, even with players like Tsitsipas, as kind of the huge favourite. And that's a bit of a problem, really, because what made Roger, Rafa and Novak so good was they were elite against everyone else. And, you'd expect them to beat everyone else. And other players could play their best lights-out tennis and maybe win 1 in 15. But you knew they would always have that level. And then the very top guys would push themselves to kind of new heights. And I do worry a little bit that Sinner won't put himself in enough positions to take Alcaraz to the new heights. And my second fear is that Alcaraz will evolve more than Sinner. And I think that's a problem, really. Like the matches we're talking about now between Alcaraz and Sinner will be remembered as tennis fans, but to the wider audience, it's important those matches happen in very big occasions, like we've just seen with Alcaraz and Djokovic. So, long story short, there is potential from a rivalry perspective, but he's got to ensure he's more consistent. And I suppose the second half of his question is it a cop-out to compare it to the big three? Well, tennis has always bigged out on rivalries, hasn't it? I think, we're always desperate for that sort of thing, and it's a criticism we've levelled at the women's game as well over the last period, that we've not had those big matches to accelerate it to new heights, and there's been lots of near misses with lots of big stars. The men's game is potentially heading into that sort of period, which would not be good. It's never good for tennis. You need a degree of consistency at the top, even if you can have lots of upsets early on as well.
Yeah, it's that thing, isn't it? And Calvin's made the comparison before, where it's great in the FA Cup when, Hereford or Wrexham or whoever it is pick up a shock result, but you don't want too many of them because then you end up with like Millwall Cardiff in the final and no one's that interested. So yes, you do need that kind of happy medium, and the men's game had that for a while, I think, where you had 3 or 4 guys who were in the semis or the final most weeks. You had a group of 5 or 6 guys who could beat them on their best day. And then you had the odd cup set, and that was the key.
And by the way, it's probably worth saying that guys like Wawrinka and Murray to a lesser degree, being, from the UK, but Del Potro, Wawrinka, probably their kind of well-knownness in kind of broader sporting circles was heightened by the players who were around them, the kind of significance. I think if you put Del Potro's career 10 years earlier in that era of kind of Safin, etc., he probably isn't remembered as fondly as when he was actually this guy who beat Rafa and Roger to win the US Open, who would come back occasionally for these epic 5-setters with Murray and Davis Cups. And, you know what I mean? I think there's a degree to which the context around can elevate certain players on the tour as well, who, as much as we love Del Potro, he didn't have the long career to almost justify how well known he is compared to maybe someone like Medvedev, for example, who's been probably longer at the top of the game than Del Potro to some degree, even though they've won the kind of same number of slams. But I'd imagine more people would name Del Potro than Medvedev.
Yeah, I think so. And look, we say it all the time in boxing and in tennis. You always need a dance partner. You need those great rivalries. There's no Borg without Becker. There's no McEnroe without Borg, frankly. All these players need someone to play against, and they need to lose sometimes, and that's the absolute key. So actually, when Michael says, is Alcaraz, Rune and Sinner the big three, it might well be, because they do beat each other, and that's a pretty big part of it. Sinner has beaten Alcaraz. He does seem to have his number. Okay, they've not been in big matches, but you'd think eventually they will be, and then it might take on that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, and I think you've got different personalities, different playing styles, different off-court temperaments, I would say. Holger Rune might not be that popular with Calvin, but he will be very popular with me if he gets to the heights of Alcaraz, is playing Alcaraz regularly, and Alcaraz turns into this pseudo Jesus figure, a la Roger, and then Holger Rune's dragging him down and winning big matches and sort of shushing the crowd and, telling everyone to fuck off or whatever, and that would be excellent. That's exactly what tennis
goes
kind of
the
needs.
explicit button, George. We nearly got away with it.
How many minutes did we go in there?
You made it 11 and a half.
That's pretty
minutes.
good.
Yeah, for you, that's not bad, actually. Well, it means I can say that Holger Rune, if he becomes the chief shithouser, then I think we will all be right behind him in that sense. I'm sure someone's made this comparison before, and maybe it's unfair. Jannik Sinner, Thomas Berdych.
Yeah, I can see it to a degree. Quite flat hitting players. I mean,
I just worry. It's kind of I'm kind of saying I worry that Jannik Sinner might be Thomas Berdych, like in terms of what he's going to achieve in his career.
Yeah, I mean, most players would bite your hand off of Thomas Berdych's career, of course.
Wow.
I think Sinner's probably in a good position in the sense of a lot will fall by the wayside to allow him a chance to kind of get higher in the rankings than Berdych, and there probably will be a few open draws, and he's good enough to go through them. Yeah, I'm not. It's not that I'm down on Sinner. It's just I was really excited by him a few years ago, and my expectations have slightly waned. But
I remember you being very excited. You were the first person to really introduce me to the Jannik Sinner hype train.
I do get quite excited quite easily by kind of young talent. When
2017 Wimbledon boys singles final.
Jack Draper was who we picked out, right?
That was not who you picked out. I was very excited about Jack Draper. You were very excited about Tseng, who has not turned out to be the player you thought he was. Yet. There's always time.
It's a bit lightweight, isn't he? Very talented player.
Unfortunately so. Right, now J-Rod has already had one question, but he blocked a second question onto his first one, so I removed it and saved it for you, George. He has said, and these are his words, not mine, do you all think Arena can overtake Iga for number one? He is, of course, referring to Arena Sabalenka and, of course, Iga Swiatek. What he means by y'all, I don't necessarily know. That is not my language. But in the live rankings, Sabalenka is 1,400 points behind Swiatek, who, of course, will be defending her US Open title later this month. Incredibly, the US Open is less than 2 weeks away. I can't quite believe that. I know it does help. I've been on holiday for 3 weeks, but anyway. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility, is it, George? Do we think that Arena Sabalenka has the nerve, the consistency to deal with all those different thoughts going through her head? The idea of trying to win a US Open, the one we all thought she would win first, of trying to get to world number one. It's a lot to cope with, isn't it?
I think the rankings I start looking at this time of the year is the race. And by that one, I think I'm right in saying Sabalenka's...
Yeah, she is number one by 100, 250 points, I think.
But it's close.
Oh, yeah. 6-5, 6-1 plays 6-3, 1-6. It's not a walkover.
So the answer is definitely yes. She can pip her to be world number one. I think we sort of said at the start of the year, didn't we, really, that we didn't expect Swiatek to have such dominance this year comparatively in terms of, it's not every season you put together 40-match winning streaks. That's a really unique and rare feat that she'd be really proud of. And we felt Sabalenka was improving, obviously got over the line to win the Australian Open, and Rybakina's probably not a million miles off kind of those two in terms of points as well, probably a little bit further back, maybe 1,000 or so points, I'd imagine. So, yeah, definitely can. You're right to kind of bring up the pressure stuff. I mean, there's still been a few matches this season, French Open semi-finals springing to mind, kind of against Mukova, where that pressure's definitely been there and sat on her shoulders. And I think it's part of Sabalenka's charm in many ways that she is quite human.
She's vulnerable, isn't she? And that you're right, it is part of her appeal.
She's got this fantastic game and all the talent in the world, but the biggest challenge is often between her two temples, which is a place I can relate to in many sporting scenarios without the talent. But I think Swiatek's a bit vulnerable this season as well. Though I think she's dipped more than I was expecting her to. I've kind of gone out of the phase of being like, oh, Swiatek's going into a match and winning that 8 or 9 times out of 10. I think it's closer to, still pretty high, 7, but lost to Pegula this week, and just, I don't know, I feel that more players are fancying their chances against her. She's still my favourite for the US Open, but I think Sabalenka can definitely go toe-to-toe with her, and it'd be very good for the women's game. A similar conversation to the men's one we've just been having. If we can get this tournament with one of Sabalenka and Rybakina, or Sabalenka and Swiatek playing each other in semi-finals, finals of Grand Slams, that'll be great. That's exactly what we want. And probably the other one you're hoping for the tints of recovery that have been there. Also lost to Pegula this week is probably Coco Gauff, who then has a statement performance against the top 3. That would be my big 4 I would like to see at the minute. But
George, do you think anyone else will be trying to deploy the tactic that clearly Jess Pegula happened upon of getting the stadium PA system to play Cotton Eye Joe randomly midpoint? What is surely the weirdest let of the week is, and it was at like 3-4 in the tiebreak as well. Like, it wasn't an inconsequential point, and Cotton Eye Joe just starts blaring over the tannoy in Montreal. Not ideal.
Well, with the financial clout Pegula's got, you do have to question whether she...
she bought the company that makes the tannoys, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely remarkable. It was just...
It was
very
my
amusing.
My favorite bit of it was just Maria Cicak's face in the chair. Like, she obviously called let. I was just like, replay the point, and then she just sits there like not trying not to react, but just like eyes sort of scrunched closed in cringe and pain.
It's just like such an incredible song for it to be as well.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
could have
exactly.
been anything, like
Yeah.
just a normal kind of,
The only
club
maybe
banger.
funnier one and more relevant one would have been Barbie Girl by Aqua, but that didn't seem that. Unfortunately, we didn't get that lucky. But yeah, I
But
suspect...
even Barbie Girl's got a bit of a slower start, doesn't it? Like,
Oh dear, no, please stop, George. Honestly, I can just hear people
whereas,
turning off.
Cotton Eye Joe just straight
Oh dear.
It's such a inserting song.
George, maybe you just leave that glass of rosé where it is for the next couple of minutes. That'd be great. So moving swiftly on. Now, one person we haven't mentioned actually when we were talking about Toronto is Alex De Minaur, who did reach the Toronto final. He beat Norrie, he beat Fritz, he beat Medvedev, he beat Davidovich Fokina. I mean, I feel like Alex De Minaur, maybe it's just because where he's always ranked in the world, whenever he goes on a run, he doesn't half pick him. I mean, that is a good list of people to beat on a North American hard court. I mean, sure, lost in the final and it wasn't a great final. A real shame, actually, what I will always call the Rogers Cup. Both finals, absolute dog shit final between Jessica Pegula and Lyudmila Samsonova, and then quite a poor one between Alex De Minaur and Jannik Sinner, quite frankly. But nevertheless, good for the Aussie to I think he just keeps surprising us, doesn't he? Or to play devil's advocate, this is what Alex De Minaur is. Has a few good weeks, gets to a final, probably never going to win a big title.
Yeah, I mean, that probably is what he is, really. Although I caveat that by saying I feel like he's having more good weeks this season than he has in previous seasons. I think he's on the verge of top 10, both in the race and in the kind of actual rankings, which...
He's 11th in the race. I mean, yeah, he's certainly having one of his career years.
Yeah. And I think I've seen him play a lot of excellent matches this year. I still think over best of 5 sets, he will ultimately be too lightweight to win big titles. But in the same breath, I've just been talking about Sinner, that in the post-Djokovic era, it wouldn't surprise me if Alex De Minaur reached a Grand Slam final. I think there will be doors that open if there's not more Alcaraz-like characters storming through. Why not?
Jack Sox won a Masters title. As I always say when we have these conversations. I think what's interesting is that, yes, De Minaur is a bit lightweight, but he's clearly evolving some sort of ability to take these guys on. He's won his last 2 matches against Daniil Medvedev, for example, who is traditionally one of the biggest hitters. And I know Medvedev's got his own problems at the moment, but and probably you would say De Minaur is not a bad, would quite fancy that matchup. Like, these days, making Medvedev make a lot of balls, you do wonder whether that's going to actually work quite well for him. But, he's also developed a decent head-to-head against Taylor Fritz, who is also a big hitter. And it's like he's learning how to deal with these situations where he is going to be a bit underpowered. And, a bit like Tommy Paul, he's working out how to do it his own way.
Yeah, I mean, he's very, very quick and got great hands around the court. And, that gives you kind of chance against anyone. I suppose when I'm talking about the opportunities to win Grand Slams over the next while, it's can you beat Carlos Alcaraz, really? And I think that's just a terrible matchup for him because Alcaraz is similarly quick and agile around the court. He can take him on in those kind of nippy battles and wide runs and short balls. He can get there. He can play a good drop shot. He can get back. He can outplay it or at least compete with him on his terms on that version. But Alcaraz can also whack it through him, and De Minaur can't whack it through Alcaraz. It's just Alcaraz has too many avenues to win points by comparison to what De Minaur does against him. Whereas I think Medvedev's a bit of a different story, and this is turning into kind of Medvedev's problem. Is Medvedev really wins points in one way unless his serves are really firing. He wins it by making a lot of balls, making it difficult, and De Minaur can get there. And De Minaur, while I have said he's a bit lightweight, he's actually a very, very good counterpuncher for someone like Medvedev. He can get out to a lot of balls and spring it back cross court at tight angles. When Medvedev isn't necessarily the world's best mover. He's not a bad mover. He's a good mover for his height. But that's the sort of ball that actually, if Medvedev drives him out and De Minaur gets there and sends it back the other way, he can win a lot of points that way that he wouldn't win against Alcaraz because Alcaraz will just go and get it and stick it down the line and then be back on top of the point. So, yeah, I've been encouraged and I think he's played some great stuff this year. But, We're talking about the creme de la creme here, James, and who can take on Alcaraz, and I don't think he's that man.
I think I would struggle to disagree with you, quite frankly, and I'm quite surprised we talked ourselves into a conversation that involved will Alex De Minaur win a Grand Slam, because I don't think that's a question I would even deign to ask. But maybe that's just me underestimating people, as I always do. Oh my goodness, Manchester United have scored. That does not fill me with joy.
Calvin will be pleased, at least. I was starting to fear for him he was going to have a bad night after saying he didn't want to talk to us because this was joy in his life and it expressed some surprise from us, shall we say.
I think it's Rafael Varane, who scored of all people. I was quite confused because he's wearing number 19 and number 19 is a forwards number. But anyway, neither here nor there. Sorry, I'm just going to watch the goal. This is great podcasting for everyone. Oh, yes, it's a header. You won't be surprised to learn. Right, moving on. Daniel Collins and Maria Sakkari falling out. I mean, this is pretty funny stuff, isn't it? I mean, it's up in there in the shithousery stakes. My first feeling is that you don't need to shithouse Maria Sakkari at the moment. Unfortunately, she will shithouse herself. But Daniel Collins, she's one of those people who, on commentary, where they always have to be a bit nicer, on live comms, to say, "Oh, she's such a competitor. She competes so hard." Like, what they mean is she's a bit of a dick, which I completely admire. And I mean, that's exactly what this was, right? Like, Sakkari missed the serve, and the ball came back, and then she whacks it, she hits it away, and it goes into the crowd. Is that right?
Yeah, and it wasn't at any great pace or velocity or It was just a bit of an odd one, really, all around, that Collins would bother biting so much. And, Sakkari sort of went back at her a bit and sort of told her to shut her mouth and what was she saying, which To be honest, I would probably do in the same situation if I was playing someone like that. Don't be a
I mean, I
tattletale.
love it. It's like
Well,
waving.
great
It's
to
like
watch.
waving the imaginary yellow card. It's
Exactly.
exactly,
She should get booked in the first place. But,
it's exactly what should have happened.
Yeah.
The umpire should be like, "Well, you're asking for a code, so you'll get one."
Yeah. How is that not a code violation? That should definitely be one.
Well, if anything, it's like I suppose you can't get a time violation between first and second serve, can you? Because you can get a time violation on receiving, but you can't get one between first and second serve. So maybe if it had been at a different point in the match, she could have got time.
Yeah, I've never seen it, but I imagine you could get one
Between first and second.
If you really took them in.
Yeah, you'd have to be... Yeah, probably.
There's got to be something in there that it
Well, the
can't
thing
be
is,
that loose.
George,
I know Djokovic does it.
I spend a lot of my time reading the Grand Slam Handbook, and the main thing I have learned about the Grand Slam Handbook is it is deliberately vague. There are very few specificities in there. It's mostly just like, oh yeah, well this is bad. If you do bad things, then you get a code. So like people are always, oh, but you didn't hit it into the crowd that hard. It's like, doesn't matter. Grand Slam Handbook doesn't care how hard you hit it. Doesn't really care if it leaves the court. That's your code. And then it's just like the word egregious gets used a lot. And like if it's egregious, then you can get disqualified. I mean, I don't know. Like it was a classic one where it was just like the ball's come back and she's just like returning it to a ball kid's area, and she's just got it a bit wrong because she was losing 4-2 to Danielle Collins, so there weren't many balls going where she meant them to go. Without being too... There's been a lot of meanness. You missed the first half, George, but there's a lot of meanness about Maria Sakkari there too. I really like Maria Sakkari. She's a really interesting player, but she's got a bit of a problem. Anyway, let's move on to the final, I was going to say fact of the night. I don't think fact is the right word. 75% of players, American tennis players, think they would take a game off a pro. I wanted to ask Calvin this. I didn't have time. I will ask him next week once you've all had the chance to respond. James Blake, player of some repute, says, I remember wondering this when I was a 16-year-old junior tennis player. Then when I became a pro, I realised the answer is emphatically no chance would I have gotten a game. Anyone that isn't D1 level, i.e. like top level college player, isn't getting a game. And some that are D1 aren't getting a game. George, what's the highest ranked tennis player you think you could take a game off?
So, when I was in my youth, James, a bit more athletic and had my
before your knee
flying,
and the other knee and your back and your hamstring and your wrist and shoulder.
So I once played some Aussie who there's a competition called National Club League.
Right.
It's kind of a mixed singles double thing. So you take 4 players to a club, you play another club, and all 4 of you play a singles match, and then you combine into 2 pairs to play a doubles match, and you score points, and then there's a kind of league that, whoever has the most points does well in the league, etc. So I used to go and play this, and I was much more of a doubles player, kind of big serve, volleyer, and too lazy to play good singles, really. And also, as we mentioned, pretty poor between the temples. So that wasn't really my vibe. So I didn't really have much of a singles rating. I don't know if they have the same ratings these days, but so I always used to be our kind of 4th player playing the lowest ranked one. I used to turn up thinking, it'd be good to be the 4th player. I'll have no problems here. I'll be taking on someone who's probably not so good. What kept happening was I kept playing people who came from other countries who didn't have a British ranking. So I ended up playing one time some Australian bloke who used to be a top 300 doubles player. I found out afterwards. I didn't realise while I was playing. I was absolutely losing my head as he was pumping me 6-1 to 6-2 or something. And I was like, what the hell? This guy's not even that good. Only to get off after throwing a little tantrum and finding out when you're chatting to all the other players, he's been top 300 in the world doubles. Like,
crikey.
Great. Maybe I wasn't quite as crap as I thought I was then. So I think back then that I absolutely would not take a game off a pro, not even close. But I used to be able to serve up towards 120 miles an hour, and if I hit that right and get it in the right place, I might win a point by virtue of it just either not coming back or coming back and giving me such an easy shot. That's my theory.
So you think you could win a point?
I think I could win a point. But if you
But
put
the
it
idea
into
of
the
winning
rally,
4 out of...
the idea, I'd have to hit 4 perfect serves, which
out of
never
7.
happens, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, I don't think so. Return-wise, absolutely not. I'd get hammered. They've got amazing serves. Like, I think my serve's quite good for kind of amateur level.
Yeah.
But, like, that's the baseline of a male tennis player to serve about that speed.
Also, like they're just not going to try and hit the lines. Like they're just
Exactly.
going to put it in the box
in different places
at
with much
110 mile an
more
hour.
spin and
Yeah.
So
Like-
it's like a stupid question. Like that, I would get some balls back and they would muck around with me and they'd probably put. Like I've played good singles players before who are quite highly nationally ranked, and it would just basically be me running around chasing the ball for ages, them dropping it short, lobbing it over my head, me going back and getting it, them dropping it short again, me running for about 40 seconds to win a point, and then being knackered for the next 10 minutes. And occasionally winning some points on my serve and feeling good. I flash the occasional return past them where I catch it, but otherwise just being ground down and really met against boys sort of stuff. And
like
I'm not a bad tennis player. I promise you, I would not come close to winning a game. Not even close.
It's like when you play squash against someone who's much better than you, and they just push you around the court, and it's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. Right, I've got one final thing, George, which we will talk about it, and it's something that you guys talked about last week, and I was listening interestedly, as in my producer role. I've had an email from Susan, who hails from Dublin in Ireland. Says, new listener here who really likes your straight talking takes. So I was very interested to hear what you'd have to say about Martina Navratilova's latest tweet about trans women in tennis. Honestly, I was very disappointed by your framing of the issue as in this is something so not something you want to be talking about, but having listened to lots of your podcasts, feel sure you might be willing to give this more thought. My sense is that Martina's own experience of discrimination actually fuels her willingness to speak on this issue and stop other women being discriminated against. She's not alone. Both Judy Murray and Chris Evert have expressed support for categories based on biological sex. Surely we shouldn't ignore all these impressive icons of our sport. Male advantage is real, and no amount of reduced testosterone changes that. My own 14-year-old son, who is already stronger than me, is living proof of that. Trans women who have had the advantages of male puberty should be offered the choice to compete in the open category or in a new third category, but not at the expense of biological women. I appreciate that this issue is sensitive and that no one wants to exclude people from participating in sport, but why should women's access to fairness be less important than inclusion? We need to be honest about this. This is about competing rights and not just some right-wing culture war. Hope you don't mind me sending my tuppence worth, but tennis for me was the only sport growing up with huge female stars like Steffi Graf and Monica Seles that I looked up to. I'd hate to lose that for the next generation of girls. I tell you what, George, because I wasn't speaking on this last week, I want to give you my kind of tuppence worth to borrow Susan's phrase. I mean, as we've said, when we've had off-air chats and on-air chats about this before, that at its heart, this is an insoluble problem. To use a word that one of my colleagues kind of used, and I thought was a very good way of putting it. Someone is going to be hurt by whatever decision you make here. Now, some people will take a kind of utilitarian view where it's like, well, let's hurt the fewest number of people by banning trans women from women's sport, which, they will say that there are more cis women in the world than there are trans women, so we're hurting the fewest number of people in that way. Some people will say that identifying as a woman is enough to get you into women's sport and that trans women are women. And some people will say all sorts of things like that to the nth degree and in extremis. Whether it's about competing rights and not just some right-wing culture, I think it's kind of both. I think that, there are competing rights going on here. I think that is kind of true, but I think rights can exist alongside each other and that you can create a world in which everyone has their own different types of rights. I do think it is also an inflamed culture war. We are 18 months away at most from an election in the UK, and we are very close to an election in the US as well. I guess basically the same amount of time. Those two elections could end up being very close to each other. And for both the right-wing parties in the UK and the US, they know it's an issue that they can really pincer their opposition on, which is it's not a coincidence, I'm afraid. Now, this isn't some tinfoil hat thing. It's very obvious electioneering. So I think it has become a greater issue than it needs to be. My thoughts on some of the trans rights arguments very often is that they are blown out of proportion because of that. I understand the concern to protect sport for women, and I also understand the desire to predict problems before they exist. But I think until I see like multiple trans women or, clearly mendaciously transitioned men who've decided they want to make money or acclaim in women's sport, until I see that actually happening, I'm going to struggle to believe that it can. And as far as I can tell, it hasn't yet happened. I can see there are very isolated examples of trans women taking part in elite sport, and I don't doubt that trans women have a biological advantage from having gone through male puberty. I'm pretty convinced of that. But there are lots of biological advantages that lots of people have. George is 5 inches taller than me and therefore is able to serve the ball harder. That is a biological advantage. I appreciate it's not the most kind of sophisticated of arguments, and it's a bit whataboutery, but I that's how I kind of look at it. And I think realistically, I wouldn't want a tennis club running a female-only session to look at a ruling by the USTA or by the All England Club and say to a trans girl or woman, you're not allowed here, you can't play women's tennis. And that's what sport is, I think, more about than some kind of absolutism to establish fact in the field of play. That's just my kind of mindset on it, and I know it's not a perfect answer and it doesn't solve anything, but that's the kind of way I view it. George, you will have lots of things to say, re what Susan has said as well, and not just what I've had to say, but there you go. I have my monologue now.
No, I think you've made that case very well. I think that when I'm saying I don't really want to talk about it, it's more that I feel there's a bit of a disproportionate amount of time spent on it. And as you say, James, I think my challenge to it is the problem of scale. Like, where are all these trans athletes dominating all sports? Where is this happening? You're hearing about very isolated examples. The thing we've spoken about last week is one player in an over 55s category. With all due respect, I would rather have every trans woman in the world actively being able to participate and play sport in exchange for one 55-year-old
if that's the deal,
if that's the trade-off. I don't think that's that bad, and I think there's been a big shift. I mean, in the UK, I kind of think about kind of Big Brother 15 years ago. We had a trans woman win that and be hugely celebrated.
Oh yeah, Nadia, I'd forgotten about her.
It was a really kind of popular non-issue there, and it makes me just very sad that what is a very persecuted group of people, really, is being, to excuse the phrase, being shat on quite a lot, non-stop.
I thought I was making an unsophisticated argument.
Yeah, an unsophisticated but I don't currently see very strongly the argument that women's rights are being downgraded by a very, very small amount of people. And just to say, by the way, I mean, in the broader terms, because I actually think sport is the area where it's the most interesting in inverted commas. It's the most difficult and challenging part of this debate. I'm much more kind of loose and open in the broader trans spectrum about kind of, access to women's spaces, etc. I'm much more straightforwardly pro on that. I think there is a lot more merit to a higher sporting competition. And, as you say, James, if men were to mendaciously transition regularly, the top 10 players in the world were starting to flip over because they think, I can win more money and more trophies that way, then yeah, absolutely, that would be a genuine cause. I don't think that's going to happen or will happen. It would take an extraordinary set of circumstances for that to happen. But more broadly, I think the idea that women are less safe in certain spaces, in my view, is more a reflection on how men are in society rather than trans women. You know, women aren't safe in space. You know, if you put a sign on the door saying it's a women's only toilet, for example, if a bloke wants to go in there and assault people, they will do that regardless of that sign. You know, we're talking very different kind of arguments. So I know we're getting quite far away from tennis here, but I do just think there's a bit of framing in this case. We want such a small, select amount of the population who, to be honest, are probably going through all sorts of kind of mental trauma and societal backlash, that actually adding all this fuel to the fire when we should be trying to be a supportive and open culture. I just find really hard on their behalf, and you know they don't need me to be out flying the flag for them. And I think we just spend a lot of time on it when really it's not really happening, in my view, in sports at the minute, to any great scale anyway. But yeah. I think your points broadly, it was a very nice email, and I don't disagree with the broader points. And yeah, it's not an easy one.
No, and thanks for getting in touch, Susan. I know I replied to you on email as well, but if you have your own thoughts, then please do email us, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. Like, you know, we're always happy to hear from people and to talk about these issues. As I think, we sometimes forget what it can. You know, sometimes you say things and you know what you mean, and I know what you mean, but we know each other so well. Sometimes it comes across a different way. Oh my goodness, there's a streaker at Manchester United Wolves. not a Just Stop Oil protester, just a bloke. Just a bloke running around, superb in stoppage time. Man United might sign him in a minute. Unbelievable. Sorry, it's a very serious topic and I've been distracted by something very silly. But yeah, get in touch with your views. It is something that, it's going to keep going on because people are going to keep talking about it, as I discussed. George, have you got any other business? Because I have, in rather improbable fashion, reached the end of my running order.
I don't know if you did this in the first half. It's not really a whole topic, but just to finish on a tennisy note, I just wanted to say that there've been some good comebacks this week, haven't there? With kind of Raonic and Brady and Wozniacki, who all actually got some wins under their belts.
I mean, Jennifer Brady, I genuinely thought had moved to Mars or something. Like she properly went off the radar.
Yeah, and you were big on her for a while.
I was
doing it through their questions.
And to be fair, I did do a big thing on her, and she did then make the semi-finals. I did pick the right time to be big on Jen Brady. I think she made the semi-finals of the US and then the final of the Australian Open shortly after I did a thing on her. So I'll take some credit for that.
You nailed it. Yep.
Yeah. I think probably of those comebacks, like the Raonic one is the one that surprises me the most because I interviewed Milos at Queen's just after he pulled out, and it was for a start he had just pulled out the tournament and he still did the interview with me, which is a really classy move. Like most players would have just been like, no, obviously I'm not doing this. Yeah. But yeah, we had a good chat and it was really interesting. And what I got the impression was that he was basically doing this comeback for his own kind of personal, to prove that I could, not because he thought he was going to come back like Caroline Wozniacki and say, oh, I'm going to try and win the US Open. Like he wanted to play Wimbledon one more time. He wanted to play the US Open one more time. He wanted to play on home soil one more time. And that was it. And I think that's, so I really wasn't expecting him to go out and win any matches. So actually to then go out and beat some really quite decent players, caught me a little bit off guard. TFO, obviously in a tiebreak, 2 tiebreaks, I should say. Taro Daniel, who's no mug, and then just kind of run out of puff because, he's 32 and he's not competed at the top level for years. But I think that's the one that stands out for me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was pretty. I think Raonic is a funny one, isn't he? Because he had such a period of being that guy. I said such a period. It was probably wasn't even a year, but there was a year where he was comfortably the best behind Djokovic and Murray. I think it was 2016. He lost to Murray.
Yeah, he got to the Wimbledon final. Yeah,
and then at the ATP finals, I remember him pushing them both in really good matches, and he ended that year as number 3. And you're thinking, oh, this guy's going to kick on and really start troubling them. He's playing some great stuff. And then just didn't quite happen for him fitness-wise, etc. So I think the question I was going to ask was if you're going to pick one of them to go furthest in the US Open, James, Wozniacki, Raonic, Jen Brady, who you're having and why? And I know that's so hard without seeing the draw, etc.
Super
It might be
hard.
one we return to, but
Well, just on merit, that's really tough. I think maybe Raonic, just because his game relies the least on fitness, and like he backs his serve so much, and it is world class and can trouble anyone, and obviously that it's the least physical thing. So maybe it's Raonic, but like that's maybe because I'm not necessarily backing Brady and Wozniacki to win more. Don't know. I can't see any of them making the third round. Basically, that's my problem.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I kind of feel like Raonic, he's too susceptible to just like pulling his hamstring or something. I feel like he's most likely to go out injured, but also most likely to reach the fourth round by just like a
He's the
massive
boom or
serve
bust
that could.
option.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm kind of with you on that one. But
Yeah, I will put a link, incidentally, to my interview with Milos Raonic, which is entitled "I'm Still Bitter About Losing to Murray at Wimbledon. It Left a Sour Taste." Which he was beautifully honest about that. He was just like, no, it's not my favourite memory. Like, I lost and I didn't get another chance to do it again. I hate it. So I really respect him for that. But I think that is all we've got time for. I always say that. We don't have a time limit, but we do have lives, and some of us have to sleep and get up early to get a hand therapy tomorrow. Which is going to be a new one for me. So thank you very much for listening. Please do get in touch on Twitter or on email. They're the best ways to get hold of us. If you've got my number, I suppose you could text me, but I'm not going to give that out anytime soon. And yeah, thank you for everyone who's left us a rating and a review. I saw our Spotify rating the other day and it's very good, so that was quite exciting. So please keep doing that, and do it if you haven't done it, or even if you don't have like Spotify, just get a free account and then leave us a rating after listening to a podcast. That would be glorious. But most importantly, please do come back next week.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.